Good day, everyone. It's evident that translation is everywhere. Not that obvious as we think, but it's happening every day. From the book we read, places we go, our daily transactions, friends we talk to, even down to the food we eat. This is due to the multiplicity of language which originated when the Tower of Babel was built. People learned to adapt their differences in language by then, but still find it difficult to communicate due to some barriers. This brings me to the topic I'm going to discuss today: narrowing the gap between theory and the practice of translation. Before understanding what the gap is, it is essential to revisit the concepts of both translation theory and the practice of translation. What do we mean by translation theory? It's the study of the proper principles of translation. It recognizes that different languages encode meaning in different ways, yet guide translators to find appropriate ways of preserving meaning while using the most appropriate forms of each language. It also includes principles for translating figurative language, lexical mismatches, rhetorical questions, cohesion markers, etc. In addition, translation theory consists of two competing theories, namely, to express as exactly as possible the full force and meaning of every word and turn off grace in the original. Second is to produce a result that does not read like a translation at all, but rather moves in its new dress with the same pace as its natural rendering. Principles in literary translations by Delay, Dryden, and Tytler provide guidance as to how translation should ideally be carried out. Let me share with you the principles of translation coined by Delay, Dryden, and Tytler. For Delay, a translator must understand perfectly the content and intention of the author whom he is translating. He must have perfect knowledge of the language from which he is translating and an equally exact knowledge of the language into which he is translating. He must avoid the tendency to translate word for word, for to do so is to destroy the meaning of the original and to ruin the beauty of the expression. He must employ the forms of speech in common usage, and through his choice and order of words produce a total overall effect with appropriate tone. For Dryden, there are three types of translation, namely metaphrase, word for word and line by line translation; paraphrase, meaning sense for sense translation; and imitation, where there is variance from words and sense by abandoning the text of the original as the translator sees fit. For Tytler, ideal translation should give a complete transcript of the ideas and sentiments in the original passage, maintain the character of the style, and have the ease and flow of the original text. Therefore, in order to achieve an ideal translation, some of the following principles have to be abided by. The translator must have a perfect understanding of the content and intent of the author's work to be translated. He should have a perfect knowledge of the source language and equally excellent knowledge in the target language. He should produce a total overall effect of appropriate tone through choice and order of words. He should give a complete transcript of the ideas and sentiments in the original passage. He should maintain the character of style and should have the ease and flow of the original text. So how about the practice of translation? This is where the gap comes in. While theory provides a sufficient guide to carry out an ideal translation, those who attempt to apply its principles are faced with the challenge of disparity between languages. What this all comes down to is this: the bigger the gap between the source language and the target language, the more difficult the transfer from the former to the latter will be. The gap is not only one of words as well, lexical and grammatical rules and nuances, but of culture, which in some cases cannot be faithfully carried over and appropriated into the target language. An imbalance between the target language and source language can adversely affect the ability to generate a good translation too. If the gap between what is idealized, or the theory, and the limitations during actual translation, or the practice, come head to head, how do we fix the situation? Perfection, satisfaction. Let's understand the key to narrowing the gap. Adiuni explains that the continued formulation of translation theories implies that human beings are still not yet satisfied with their desire for perfection in translation, thus leaving room for further research. To be more practical than theoretical, translation should be seen as an attempt to guess the mind of the author correctly. Furthermore, he says that in translation, it is a question of satisfaction rather than perfection. Satisfaction in translation lies in the ability to minimize the gap between theory and practice. So, by being mindful of what the author intended, translators can bring together the best of what theory has to offer in order to achieve a satisfactory and definitely not a perfect translation. When translating, the rule of thumb to remember is: good theory is based on information gained from practice. Good practice is based on carefully worked out theory. The two are interdependent. Well, Larson says it best. Finally, an ideal translation must seek to meet three criteria. First, it must be accurate, reproducing exactly as possible the meaning of the text. Second, it should be natural, using natural forms of the receptor language in a way that is appropriate to the kind of text being translated. And last, it must be communicative, expressing all aspects of the meaning that is readily understandable to the intended audience. Now, how do we aim for a good translation? Cower identifies 12 characteristics of an effective translator. First, he must be a subject specialist. Second, he must be very proficient in both the source and target languages. Third, he must be familiar with the basic principles of translation theory and practice. He must have empathy for his or her target readers, must be committed and disciplined, and must be aware of the culture of both the source and target language readers. He must learn to divide the workload among his colleagues who are subject specialists, should have all the necessary translation tools, and must be aware of the whole translation process. The last three characteristics of an effective translator are the following. He must be aware that writing and translating involves similar features. Like writing, translating involves identification of the source language document, identification of intention, interpretation of specification, and cursor reading and choice of the text type, and other activities as in writing in original work. Second, he must be aware of the importance of cognitive information processing of text so that he can be accurately understood, processed, and transformed by his or her system. Lastly, he must make use of both the writing process, for example, determining the message content and general purpose of the message, the function or the expected reaction of recipients, planning the amount and order of content, and the realization or what is expressed linguistically. And of course, making use of the three features of writing, which says writing is recursive or circular in nature. It takes time and it is different for everyone. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, everyone.